Hello, welcome back to isayhourwrong Reads, and this is my rather late October wrap-up. So, basically, I wanted to kind of focus on like horror and Gothic books in October to kind of bring up my TBR. I wanted to get it down a bit, so I first of all had to finish a book that I started in September, which was my first book in this list, and that was The Time Traveller's Guide to Restoration Britain, written by Ian Mortimer. So I picked up this book on a whim, really, because I thought the cover looked really pretty, and because of that, I kind of became obsessed with the rest of the books in this series, and they're all in my to be bought list now because I really enjoyed this one. I gave this one 5 stars, I think. So basically what this book is it's essentially just a guide as if you were living in Restoration Britain. So Restoration Britain is kind of taken to be 1660 to 1700, just after the restoration of the monarchy, after Cromwell and his gang mucked everything up, and the reign of Charles II, James the second, I think, and Will and Mary. And those three monarchies are kind of the basis of the restoration for this book. So it's essentially just like a guide of what society was like for everyday people. So it's not like the big major things that are happening at the time. It's what was living conditions like, what was money like, what was the kind of food situation, how much did things cost, what was the general feeling among the populace of that time, what was religion like for everyday folk. So it was less about the massive big historical things that were taking place during that time, which also get mentioned, but rather about the everyday people living, and kind of a snapshot of what you would experience if you time travelled back to Restoration Britain. And something that I really appreciated about it was it kind of demonstrated quite severely the differences between situations of England and Wales and in Scotland, mainly because towards the end of this period is when the kind of two kingdoms kind of came together to form the Union in 1707. So you have the kind of really stark differences between the two countries, kind of isolated almost, being brought together slowly towards this during this period. This is the only one, except from the Regency version, which focuses on Britain as a whole. Other ones focus on England specifically, or England and Wales, I think maybe. Whereas this one is the first one to actually start mentioning Scotland. And it's really interesting to see how different Scotland was to the rest of the UK during that time. And I suppose that's why I really appreciated this to have its own like sections in each chapter dedicated to how Scotland viewed it, which I just kind of, you don't get that often with history books, especially if they're like history books focused on the UK. It's normally just, oh, England and everything else is the same. It's not. Wales is different, Scotland is different, and it also shows the difference between measurements. So whereas the English foot is different from the Scottish foot, which is different from the English time, which is different from the Scottish times. Like our calendars were different and they had to be synced up, and we had a lost 10 days, and all of that was like really interesting, which is why I gave this one 5 stars. And I really enjoyed it. It did take me quite a bit to get through. It is about 400 pages, and I read this in combination with the audiobook. Kind of read it side by side. It was also a really interesting era because you had the kind of start of the scientific viewpoint coming out. So you've got lots of like establishing of like royal societies and stuff like that was encouraged by the royal family, which kind of became very important, especially in the next couple of hundred years, for the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution and all that sort of thing, which I would very highly recommend this book, especially if you're wanting to see a side of history which you might not often see, which is like the more mundane everyday. And it's really interesting to see where kind of basis for our current society. Like there was a part that talked about the way land was given to landowners and tenants, and how in the early Reformation period, it was very much tenants had the majority of the rights, and then it kind of started moving towards landowners had the majority of the rights, which formed the basis of what we have now, where landowners have a lot more control over tenants, whereas the tenants, it was like passed down through their generation, the tenancy. And even that, showing how something almost 400, 350 years ago could have such a severe impact on the way that we divvy out our land today, is just utterly fascinating, which is why I really enjoyed it. So that was The Time Traveller's Guide to Restoration Britain by Ian Mortimer. So next up, I decided to do a reread of a book because I was a wee bit down in the dumps. So I decided that I was going to make a video about a number of books that I read when I was a teenager. They recently turned 10 years old today. Not today, but like recently. And the author died last year of, I believe, a brain tumour. But I really, really liked these books when I was a teenager, and I wanted to see if they held up, like today. And that was the Morganville series by Rachel Caine. So there's 15 of these in total, and during this month, I read 5 of them in between other books. I'm not going to talk too much in detail about how I found this one because I'm going to have a dedicated video on it, so check that out when it comes out. It may come out in a couple of months, which I actually managed to finish reading all 15 of them. So that was that one. I'm not going to tell you the rating or whatever because I want to keep it a secret just in case, but I just wanted to mention that I had read it during this month. Next up was a book that I've been really looking forward to reading for quite some time, and I thought it was the perfect time to read it because it was October, we were getting into like spooky season, we were wanting some scary vibes going, and that was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Cortez. And this book, it was just absolutely what I was looking for. Had the Gothic, had the isolated feeling, had the twist. It was just absolutely brilliant. The characters were really, really well done, and especially the relationship between the antagonist and the protagonist was really interesting. It had the cousin, all the tropes that you like, I really, really love, especially in books like Woman in White, came through in this book really, really well. I think I also gave this one 5 stars, so we're on a roll for the first 2 books. I think for me personally, it definitely felt like a mix-up of Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, and like H.P. Lovecraft, kind of Lovecraftian Gothic horror, which I really appreciated because I really found this one really good. So I would definitely recommend it. Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Cortez. Next up is another Morganville book, and that was the Dead Girl's Dance by Rachel Caine. So this is basically just the same as the last one. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I like these books. They're fun. They're kind of teenager vampire books, but not like in the same way. They're not like romance books. They're just, I don't know how to explain it too much without going into depth, so I'll probably do that later, so I'll just move on for now. And then I gave Oscar Wilde's The Canterville Ghost and Other Stories a go. So this is essentially a short story collection. I think it's got, four stories in it. The Canterville Ghost, The Sphinx Without a Secret, The Model Millionaire, and Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. So in total, I give this one 3 stars. As usual, I find short story collections are a really mixed bag. And with this one, I was going and expecting like a kind of Gothic story, and it was comedy. So I was like having whiplash between what it actually was and what I was expecting it to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't bad. It's just the back of the book makes it sound like, here's a bit. However, the ghost struggles to intimidate his new victims as they counter his ghoulish behaviour with typical transatlantic pragmatism, obbling lubrications for his chains and cleaning up the stain with detergent. As the spirit is deserted by its capacity to scare, Virginia gets to know him and learns the tragic tale behind his sad fate. Like, I don't know what I was expecting when I go in here, but it definitely wasn't what I got. I also really liked, what was the other one? Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. So it kind of seemed like a one of those fate stories. So he kind of gets told the fate that he's going to kill someone, and that he has to kill someone because that's what his fate is, and then he kind of ruins himself by having to follow that fate. So going, oh, I have to kill someone, so I'm going to kill this person, and then he does, but then it ruins him because obviously he didn't have to kill it. It was just a kind of a circle kind of loop. The other two I don't really have any memory of. Sorry, Oscar, but I really enjoyed the other two. And there you go. So that was the Canterville Ghost and Other Stories by Oscar Wilde. And this was the Alma Classics copy of it, which I got, which I really am a big fan of the cover. I think all the other covers were like the boring Penguin Classics books, which are nice if you like that kind of thing, but I really like the kind of really fancy covers of them. And then we had Midnight Alley by Rachel Caine, the third one in the Morganville Vampire books. And that's all I'm going to say about it. And then I read a book which annoyed me so much that I almost threw it. I did throw it across the room twice. It was awful. It was awful. So I read a book last year that I absolutely adored. I thought it was brilliant. And then I saw that that author had written another book in the same vein. So I read Dracula by Dacre Stoker, which is kind of like a prequel to Dracula, written using Bram Stoker's notes and that sort of thing. I thought, oh my god, this was such a good book. I'm 100% going to buy the other one. Couldn't get it anywhere. It wasn't on Amazon, wasn't in Waterstones, wasn't in any like independent bookshops near me. I perchance found it about 7 months later in a charity shop in the middle of the Scottish Highlands. No idea how I managed to find it, but I did. And I picked it up and went, oh, this is brilliant. I'm going to finally read it. Dracula the Undead by Dacre Stoker and Ian Holt. Never go near this book. It is literally one of the worst books that I've read, and it's mainly I didn't like it so much because it literally takes everything that's really, really good about the actual original book and then makes it worse. It makes it so bad. Like, there was a whole bit where, oh, Dracula wasn't bad, he was just misunderstood, and oh, Mina really loved him, and Jonathan Harker's an alcoholic and an abusive husband, and Bram Stoker's evil, and Elizabeth Bathory's the real evil here, and we're going to Bram Stoker, Abraham Van Helsing is a nut job, and you're like sitting here like, what am I reading? This is awful. And then of course you've got Mild Racism in it, which is never fun for a book that was published, what, in the 90s? Oh god, this is even worse. It was 2009. Don't read this book. Please do not. I understand why it was in a charity shop now and I couldn't get it anywhere. It wasn't worth the 99p I spent on it. And then, to cheer myself up, I decided to read the fourth one in the Morganville Vampire books, which was The Feast of Fools, and it definitely cheered me up. I can even say that now. I just had to cheer myself up by reading something at least a little bit enjoyable, and I sped through this in hours after finishing this one because I was like, I need a palate cleanser somehow, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep reading this until I'm finished it, and it worked. So hey ho. And then we had Laura Purcell's Bone China. Now, I was recommended this one by a friend who is a big fan of Laura Purcell and liked Bone China, so I thought, oh, she liked it. It just said it was kind of like a horror-y kind of book. So I picked it up and I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I think I'd give it 4 stars. I do think it was quite weird because it was like majority of it's in first person, which I wasn't really expecting for some reason when I went into this book, but it was really enjoyable. It's essentially about two timelines, sort of. So the first timeline is in the past, and it was that this girl, all of her family except her and her dad, died due to consumption. So her father becomes obsessed with the idea of being able to cure consumption by going to the Cornish coast and kind of giving people sea air. And then 40 years later, after this, you have kind of that same daughter, now absolutely out of her mind, bedbound, can't deal with anything, and you're kind of having to piece things together, what's happening, if something bad and spiritual or like supernatural is happening, or if it's not. And it's that sort of psychological mind muckery that kind of goes on, that's really, really interesting about this book. And it's all tied together with these characters that are superstitious but also not superstitious, or if it's real or what is not. And I love that kind of stuff. Kind of, is it real, is it not real? And it's kind of like this similar but opposite to Mexican Gothic, I feel, in that if it's real or not real. And I really appreciate that and like it a lot. And it does really good job of like painting the Cornish coast and the atmosphere around it in a really kind of, again, it's an isolated house sort of way. So it's basically the exact same tropes as Mexican Gothic, just in Cornwall in England instead of Mexico, which, you know, is completely different vibes, but it's also kind of got the same link going through it, which I like seeing that kind of stuff. So that is Bone China by Laura Purcell. And then finally I read the 5th one in the Morganville Vampires series. So that's me a third of the way through. I will hopefully get the other ones finished in the next couple of months, and I'll be able to get that book, that video done and sorted sometime in the new year. But I do realise that's quite far away, so you'll just have to wait and see how I like those ones. And last but not least, I have a book that took me a long time to read. I have seen very conflicted opinions on this one. There's ones that absolutely swear by this book, think it's absolutely brilliant, and there's ones that are like, oh, this is awful, this is one of the worst books I've ever read. And it's The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. Now, I was like into it. Well, I wasn't really into it. I was struggling to get through it, to be honest, because it is like 700 pages, and it's mainly just Eastern European history, which is interesting, but the way that it's framed, it's like a narrative inside a narrative inside a narrative. So it's like someone's reading the letter of her father, who's researching the notes of his supervisor about the Ottoman Empire, which is very kind of in depth, and it all kind of sounds the same kind of voice. So it's not hard to determine who's saying who, because you quickly realise what's going on with the characters and that kind of thing. But it is a bit infuriating once you're like 500 pages into it and you still basically sounds the same. What I said is that it's 600 pages of Ottoman history and 100 pages of vampire novel, which, as I kind of signed up for a vampire novel, I was a bit disappointed about. Though, again, it's got that whole Dracula isn't as evil as you think. He just wants to kidnap a librarian to catalogue his collection. Sorry, that was a spoiler. Spoiler, by the way, for The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. But it did kind of just kind of whimper out at the end. It didn't really go out with a bang. And that's all I can really say about it. It's just he wanted someone to catalogue his collection for him, so they sent him on a wild goose chase to prove himself that he could do it. And then, I don't know, it was really there. I just found it kind of underwhelming, which is why I gave it 1 star. I did go on a rant to my friends in the group chat after this finished, and I cannot even for life of me remember what I was so annoyed about, but I definitely did go on a rant. So there you go. There was something in here that made me really upset, and I cannot tell you for the life of me what it is now. So maybe you'll have to just sit and read it and find out. But that was my last book of the month, and that took me a good week to get through, just because it was just so dense and thick. Like, it doesn't look too thick here, and it's like 700 pages of that. Nah. Not for me. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I think my favourite book this month was definitely Mexican Gothic, and my least favourite was Dracula the Undead. But for this month, it was very much basically every single book except one, I think, or two. Every single book except 2 out of 10 were vampire books, which, don't get me wrong, I love vampire media, which is why I kind of have so much. I did buy a couple of other ones this month, which are quite out of my comfort zone. Like, I bought Stephen King's Salem's Lot this month, which I'm really looking forward to trying, but I also have never read one of his books before, so that's going to be an adventure. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any recommendations for other kind of horror or vampire novels, not romance, please. I don't really like romance. It's not really my thing. But like any other vampire literature, please do put them down in the comments below, and I'll check them out because I absolutely love that kind of genre. Or the kind of psychological horror a la Mexican Gothic as well, I would highly recommend. If anybody has any recommendations, please do shout them out. So bye, and I will see you next week.